Yes, the Tarzan swing. Another fond memory of my life growing up in suburban Maryland, right on the District of Columbia line, Southern Avenue. There's a road called, I think it was Iverson Street, that used to run right underneath Iverson Mall. Yes, Iverson Mall in Maryland used to extend over the top of a road, which was totally cool as a little kid, to be able to walk over top of cars and trucks as they sped by while you were doing your casual shopping. But Iverson Mall, Hillcrest Heights, that's a different story. In one of my former stories, I said that we lived in Hillcrest Heights. Well, that was true when we lived off of St. Barnabas Road in another apartment project. The original apartment project that we lived in on Southern Avenue, can't think of the name of this project, but that was in a place called Oxon Hill. I went to high school, Potomac Senior High School in Oxon Run. And then near Marlow Heights, my junior high school was Benjamin Stoddard Junior High School. I'm meandering and I'm wandering off the main story. But somewhere off of Iverson Road was a set of woods behind the apartment project that we grew up in. And thank goodness there was an old farm that the farmer had never sold, and he just had this vast area of woods around this really nice watershed and creek and all that. Well, along with building forts in the woods and playing army in the woods and playing with our BB guns in the woods behind the apartment project, we were creative enough to make a Tarzan swing. Now, there was a nice American beech tree. That would be a Fagus grandifolia to all you Linnaeus scientific name types. But this beech tree was nice, huge size, up on a hilltop that had been eroded away by years and years of the curving of the river there. So you had about 2 to 3 story drop from the base of that beech tree that overlooked the little creek or brook running at the base of the eroded hill. The hill going down to the beech tree had about a 10% slope, and somebody long ago had climbed up in the beech tree and tied a pretty sturdy rope to one of the branches. We don't know who did it, but it was a good rope, and what we would have to do is add more lengths of the rope to the rope that had sort of rotted out and broken and frayed in places. So with enough ingenuity, we had connected to the original rope and had enough room to run down the hill, hold on to the Tarzan swing way out over the river or the creek, and then if we'd angled it just right, we'd swing back on the other side of the tree and land back up on top of the hill. You notice I said, if we swung exactly right. Well, being kids that didn't understand physics that much, we didn't always swing exactly right. A lot of kids like to just swing straight out and straight back. Others would try the grand loop. And others sometimes, well, the grand loop would wind up putting them right back into the lower part of the hillside or into a tree. You never knew what was going to happen, but it was grand fun. Now, being the efficiency expert that I was as a young boy, I borrowed one of my father's machetes, or machete, as some people call them. Had a good edge on it. And underneath the Tarzan swing area, there were a lot of saplings that had grown up that a lot of times, if you didn't swing just right, you beat yourself to pieces in all these saplings as you were swinging. So I decided these needed to be cut down so that we had a clear area for swinging. Makes sense. Well, not being the most swift kid in the neighborhood, when I took the machete and cut these saplings down, I just sliced them off about 3 or 4 inches from the ground and dragged the trees away to the side, or left them as I felt. But what I left was all of these nice punji sticks, sort of these sharpened pieces of wood sticking up out of the ground right under where we were going to be doing our swinging. Not too smart. I remember one time I was having a good time with my friends swinging, and we had stuck the short piece of wood, piece of oak or something, or hickory, as our handle on the end of the rope. I took a really good run holding the rope and the stick in my hand, and there was always this little bit of slack as we jumped off the hill, and then our full body weight would yank the rope taut and give us a good terrifying jolt as we began our arc across the creek and back to the hillside. Well, many people had been swinging, and the stick was kind of slippery, and we hadn't done anything to the stick to make it stay in the center of the rope. Hadn't thought about the stick slipping. Well, I swung out, and the stick started to slip. And it slipped, and it slipped to where there wasn't room for my left hand to hold on to it. So there I was, holding on with just my right hand, flailing around in the air, and I wasn't strong enough in my right arm to hold myself, and I couldn't reach back up with my left to grab the rope. So I let go about a third of the way out, heading towards the creek. I hoped and prayed I would land in the water. That would be good. But where did I land? You guessed it, right on my back, right in the middle of all the little sharpened stumps that I had just cut not a few days before. By the grace of God, I didn't land on any of the tall ones. I landed in between most of them. Maybe scraped my arm on a couple. But one particular nasty short one went right in the small of my back, just above my belt. I cannot express to you the pain. Fortunately, the puncture wound was not that bad, and we sort of washed it out with creek water, and my breath was knocked out of me, and my friends were laughing and all that, but being the tough kid, as tough as you could be amongst your friends and laughing off the blood and the pain, we all sort of went down there and stomped those little sharpened nubs down as flat as we could, because I didn't have the machete with me. And we proceeded to go right back and continue swinging. Well, that's not the end of the Tarzan swing story. Also, at the base of the hill by the creek, some of us had discovered fossils. There were some very poorly shaped marine, very fragile fossils of these coiled shells. And who knows how old they were or how long we had been running around them and seeing them there and not thinking much about them. But we all decided to have a fossil dig along with a grand Tarzan swing event. And there was tons of kids down there. Well, there was also a good friend of ours, Filipino guy by the name of Danilo. And to protect the innocent, I will not use his last name. Another Filipino friend of mine there, his name was Albert. And we had the whole gang down having a good time. Danilo had a big Bowie knife, and I mean big. It was like a blade 6 inches long and really sharp. And he kept it in his sheath, his knife holster or whatever. For some reason, while everyone was down digging fossils, about 3 or 4 of the guys and the rest were playing on the Tarzan swing, Danilo had left his Bowie knife up on the top of the hill. And being the super cool, agile kind of Filipino guy he was, he had jumped off the swing and landed at the base of the hill with no problem, just like a monkey. But having left his knife at the top, he yelled to my brother and said, "Hey, Mark, throw me my knife." Well, as Mark picked it up and was getting ready to throw it, I don't know what he was thinking, but he didn't toss it gently underhand. He held the knife back over his shoulder and threw it like you were throwing a baseball. As he was letting it go, Danilo yelled and said, "Don't do that. Make sure that the sheath is tied on." Well, in midair, as we saw the knife pirouetting out of the sheath, it came. A silver blade flashing in the sun, the dappled sunlight of ensuing horror. The knife flew over Danilo's head and headed straight for the guys digging fossils. We all watched in horror as the knife, spinning out of control through the air, went directly towards a friend of ours named George. And I will not use last names to protect the victimized innocent. We heard a loud scream. I thought the worst. Oh my God, George is dead or mortally wounded. Fortunately, the knife spinning through the air only cut through the calf of one of his legs. And I mean a deep cut. Down through muscle, down to something that looked white at the bottom. Yes, it was a serious cut. So my brother stood at the top of the hill with his mouth hanging open, and the rest of us stood around with our mouths hanging open and watched poor George writhing around in pain. Very quickly, we took off our white T-shirts and made tourniquets to stop the bleeding, and compression bandages tied off over his leg. It was a long ways back to the apartment buildings and a long ways back to emergency services. So 4 of us made our arms together in something called the fireman's carry, and we carried George, crying and sobbing, probably a mile or 2 back through the woods, back to our apartments. We dropped him off at his apartment, and the rest of us scattered to our own particular apartment buildings, acting as if nothing had happened. So we walk into the house, and my mother looks at both of my bare-backed brother and I and said, "Where are your T-shirts?" We sort of froze in place and knew where they were, saturated, covered in blood, wrapped around George's leg. And we said, we must have left them in the woods. And my brother, or one, I can't remember which one of us said, "I think we gave them away to someone." So it wasn't too long after that George's mother called our house from the emergency room and explained how my parents were going to pay the hospital bill. My parents didn't have extra money for emergency room hospital bills. So it was determined that no one was really at fault. It was just kids being stupid. And the bill was split down the middle between George's parents and my parents. So the Tarzan swing was kind of a hazardous place. George, of course, got stitches and recovered nicely and would show them off to everybody in the project as he was the hero with the biggest, deepest cut on his body and the most stitches that anybody had ever seen. So even though George was the victim, he somehow became the hero of the apartment project, all due to the Bowie knife incident at the Tarzan swing.